Good evening and welcome, folks, to our Finger Lakes Wine Virtual Tasting Series. We're very excited tonight. We're going to be tasting Riesling, and we've got some bloggers and writers joining us tonight. We have some who are very familiar with Finger Lakes wines and some which are trying some for some of the first times ever. And the way the evening's going to work, we have two flights of wines with some winemakers or principal owners from each panel. And my name's Jeff Hauk. I'm the winemaker at Lucas Vineyards, and I'm going to be our moderator this evening. And we're going to go right into our first flight of wines. I'm going to introduce our first winery. Is Hosmer Winery. We have Aaron Roizen from Hosmer. Aaron has been in the Finger Lakes about 10 years, I believe he said. He makes some great wine. He has a great vineyard to work with. And Aaron, can you talk to us a little bit about your 2010 Vintners Reserve Riesling?
Yeah, so the 2010 Vintners came from a single block of grapes. It's one of the oldest blocks of Riesling on the farm. They're pushing 30 years now. It was two fermentation tanks. One was using ICV GRE, and the other was using cryo-arome from Begro. Both tanks went through full fermentation to dry, so it's around like 0.2 to 0.4 grams per liter. The alcohol is around 12.1%, so it's a little higher in alcohol than I typically do for Riesling. I usually like to keep them around 11 to 11.5. But I think it just gives a little more expression to the fruit and adds a little sweetness to the fact that it's so dry. Yeah, I spent 5 months on the lees unsulfured. I stir the lees about every other week, and yeah, just aged out till then, and then bottled it up. But yeah, it's an interesting wine in terms of the reference it gives to Hosmer, and that it's a lot more minerally, or the minerality is more driving in it than the typical Hosmer, which is a fruitier style. The acidity is a lot sharper. It's a much more austere approach. So that's what we were going for, was more of that style, that really bone dry and searing acidity, that almost unpleasant. But hopefully it comes off across as being a lot more pleasant than it is.
So those of you following the tasting this evening, anyone have any questions for Aaron about that first wine? While we're waiting on that, I'll just throw out to the panel while we have a moment. Any of you like to let us know how many acres of Riesling are currently planted in the Finger Lakes?
There are about 800 acres presently. I'm not sure how much is added each year, but probably about 25, which is not a lot. I'd like to see a little bit more going in the ground.
Thanks, Sarah. Aaron, someone had asked how many, do you make the Vintners Reserve each year, or is it only certain years that product is made?
Yeah, it's year to year specific. It's really dependent upon if we feel that a certain block has more depth and just different than the other fermentations and grapes that come in. So it's definitely the last one we made before 2010 was 2008. 07 we made one, but before that it was 06, and then I think 03. So it's not a annual production.
And is it a certain block in your vineyard that you typically like to use to produce that wine?
Yeah, it typically comes from our shop block, or our, as Tunker Hosmer calls it, the go broke block, because it never yields very high. It's self-regulating growth, so I mean we're lucky to get 3.5 tons of the acre on it. But it's very interesting, very curious site. Really heavy clay. It's Casanovium high lime clay soils that it grows on, so you can just about make pottery with it when it gets this dry out. But yeah, it's a unique block to the farm, for sure.
Very good. Before we move on, I'm going to check and see if we have any more questions off our Twitter feed. And I'm just going to throw out to this panel one more question. Would anyone like to talk about the different flavors from the different lakes, whether or not you feel that there's a difference in the flavors between Cayuga, Seneca, and Cayuga Lake? Does anyone on the panel want to take that question?
Well, being that I've spent now it's half my time in the Finger Lakes on Seneca Lake on the east side, and then now my other half on the west side of Cayuga Lake. I feel that, at least for the Hosmer Farm, compared to the other two properties that I've worked with, which were both estate wineries, that I think Cayuga Lake has a little more tropical fruits, whereas Seneca Lake, the fruit that I worked with, has a little bit more minerality and a little bit more herbal flavors to it. But you know, those were also different clones that I worked with, so it's not really hard. It's not really easy to pinpoint, but yeah, I think there's more. It's more of a fruity, lighter style of Rieslings typically from Cayuga, and Seneca tends to produce more minerality and herbaceous, more of a savory versus a sweet. I guess has been my take on this.
I think a lot of us have noticed some of the same things. And one of our panelists, Shannon, had mentioned earlier there's a study going on called a Riesling typicity study, where Cornell University is studying just what we're talking about, whether or not there is differences that consumers can perceive in our Rieslings in different locations. And the results of that are still coming out. And we're gonna go ahead and move on to our second wine this evening. We have with us this evening Sarah Fulkerson. Sarah is definitely one of the pioneers in the Finger Lakes wine industry. He's been making wine and running a vineyard for many years. And Sarah has this evening his William Viognier Dry Riesling, 2010 vintage. And welcome, Sarah. And could you tell us a little bit about how that wine was made?
Yeah, thank you. The grapes were primarily 2 blocks on the farm, and they were both what we call the Fournier clone, or Gold Seal clone, when Charles Fournier and Dr. Frank brought the first Riesling into the area, and it was just Riesling, just a common clone. So we have an original block that dates to the early 70s, and that's considerably later than the late 40s when they first brought Riesling in, but we've been propagating from there. We propagate our own vines, and that's quite a bit distinctive from some of the more recent clones that we're more familiar with, like 239. It tends to have a little bit more tangerine note, a little citrus as well, of course, but maybe not quite as maybe not quite so much the honey-like characters that you might get in the other clones. This wine, of course, 2010 was a warm year. We and the harvest season was kind to us, and we were able to harvest when we wanted to, basically, which is unusual here, and get them fully ripe. And of course, we're all concerned about is it too hot for it. I'm not sure it was. We fermented this wine dry, and it went through full malolactic fermentation and was on the vine leaves for about 4 months. This is probably the main difference with this wine. And of course, like Aaron's wine, it's bone dry, or rather, technically speaking, between 0.2 and 0.3 residual sugar. The yeast can't find well, but certainly a style for food, and certainly a very refreshing wine for this hot weather we've had.
So for some folks might be unfamiliar with malolactic fermentation in Riesling. Was it just trial and error that brought you to try that out with Riesling?
When I discovered that it would not make butteriness like you would expect in a fully fermented Chardonnay, and I've always liked the Alsatian styles, and thought that might be a good compromise here, rather than having to deacidify using other methods. Malolactic is enable it to have a very dry wine without a lot of manipulation.
Very neat. It's always neat when someone is in the region is trying something different with a grape that's that popular, and with some good results. While we're waiting to go on to our next panelist, would anyone like to answer this question about whether they see a need for more Riesling to be planted in the Finger Lakes? Anyone want to take that one?
Oh yeah, we need to plant more Riesling, without a doubt. I think to cement us in the pantheons of great American grape regions, having supply for our champion variety is a necessity. I don't think that there's any worry of a glut happening. I mean, 800 acres is one small vineyard in Washington State by one winery. So for us to even think that there's a need is definite.
And one other question before we move on. Do you prefer to blend other grape varieties in your Riesling or keep it 100% varietal? And anybody can answer that question that wants to.
I certainly prefer to keep it 100% varietal. Sometimes you can add some nuances to it, but you know, with the Gewürztraminer, perhaps. But you know, in the end, you know, it's got a little Gewürztraminer in it. I'm not sure why it would need it. I think with dry table wine, it's just going to keep it pure varietal.
All right. Well, thank you, Sarah. We're going to move on to our third wine of the first flight, and that's Red Newt Wine Cellars. We have with us this evening Kelby Russell. Kelby, if you're watching, young guy, but don't be fooled by his age. He has one of the best palates in the Finger Lakes, and he's had a chance to travel all around. And he's definitely an up-and-comer in the region. And he has tonight the 2010 Sawmill Creek Vineyards Riesling. Kelby, you want to tell us a little bit about that wine?
Sure. The Sawmill Creek Vineyard is a vineyard that Red Newt gets a good amount of its fruit from. It's kind of planted right below our property, right on Seneca Lake, on the banana belt on the southeast side of the lake. Planted by Jim Haslett, the two particular blocks of Riesling that we harvest from. There's one that's a little bit further up the hill, a little bit slittier, a little bit closer to some fruit trees and orchards. Year in, year out, that kind of varies. The lower block is where this particular bottling comes from, and where most of the bottlings come from. In a way, it's the single vineyard wine, or the single vineyard Riesling, that Red Newt is probably best known for now. Just year in and year out, we find that there's this very distinct quality to that particular block within that vineyard. This kind of depth of flavor, complexity, kind of roundness in the palate, very full. Coming from the Finger Lakes, having something that has a little bit more breadth is kind of fun to play with, because we don't get too much of that. We have a great deal of linear acidity, but we don't have too much in the way of, riper fruit flavors that you can depend on year in and year out. So as has been mentioned, 2010, an extremely warm year for the region, quite atypical for the region. You're balancing out the quality of the vineyard against the quality of the vintage. Lots of nice ripe peach notes to it. I tend to find with Riesling, as it gets incredibly ripe, you start to veer back into lemon and lime range again. So you start to pick up that, and you do when you taste it. You get this nice mouth-filling palate weight to it that's really interesting, that isn't really related to alcohol necessarily. It's not overly alcoholic, it's right in the 12% range. And then another quality of the vineyard, that nice minerality that comes in the finish, nice kind of gravelly notes, slaty notes to it that really last on the palate after you've tasted it.
Excellent. Some of the folks who are familiar with the Finger Lakes might recognize that name, Sawmill Creek. Great grape growers in the Finger Lakes who have a super reputation for vinifera grape growing and have been a great source, I think, for red newt for a number of years. Any other questions off of our Twitter feed for Kelby? We'd be glad to go ahead and get those. And just in general, I'm going to throw out to the group, how important is the age of Finger Lakes Riesling vines to the final product? In other words, you have old vines. Do we feel that it makes a difference in the wines or not? Anybody want to field that one?
I think it makes a difference, but I don't think we've had the opportunity to really see what that difference is going to be just yet. I think we see a lot of new vineyard plantings that can be really precocious when they're the first couple of crops off them, and you get really excited because you see the potential. And then the finished wine has some of that potential, but might not necessarily hold on to it. And now as we're starting to see plantings, we're seeing things to 25, 30 years, we're getting a lot more, a lot more concentrated flavors, a lot more fun to work with in the winery as well, in terms of kind of the different directions, the different styles you can pursue with it with a little bit less risk.
Yeah, I agree a lot that it's with Riesling. It's not so important with vine age. You can still make a pretty decent wine, where other varieties, like Limburger, for example, doesn't start making decent wine till 10-year-old wine. It really takes some time. But yeah, Riesling, straight out the chutes.
Yeah, I was surprised in Schloss Johannesburg to find out that their average vine age is only 15 years. And so it only takes a couple years for them to get into wine.
Very good. Kelby, we had a question on Twitter as to how long that Sawmill Creek wine has been in a bottle.
It's been in the bottle probably just about a year now.
Okay.
Probably within a week or two of a year at this point.
Very good. Another question from our media questions. These were all questions our media members had asked us ahead of time. Cool weather grapes such as Riesling and Pinot Noir obviously do well in our climate. What's been the most challenging grape for each of you to produce? I'll ask everybody to quickly shoot through. Aaron, what's the most challenging grape you've had to work with?
Pinot Gris, hands down.
How about you, Sarah?
Merlot, I'd say.
Kelby?
Cab Franc.
Shannon?
Birds trainer.
Oh, great.
I don't know.
All different. I mean, probably everybody's had unique experiences in a certain vintage. Does anybody want? We have another question. Does Riesling age like its German counterparts? And I'll just throw out there, I've had a chance to do some vertical tastings of older Finger Lakes wine. We don't have the history that the German producers do, but we do know that our Rieslings age. That's my opinion as the moderator. I'll throw it over to the panel.
I totally agree. I've tasted a lot of different aged Rieslings from many different Finger Lakes wineries, and I think we're still there still needs to be more wineries actively pursuing the library program, but I think there's no question that
I think there's
ages
been
incredibly well.
issues with older Finger Lakes wine with storage conditions and closures.
Right.
And as we pay more attention to those things, I think you're going to really see that the wines, there's no reason they can't age the same way that those German wines do. So I think we're going to have to move on to our fourth wine this evening. We have not a new wine, but we have some new winery owners. We have Shannon Brock. She and her husband Paul are the new owners of Silver Thread Vineyard. Not new, just 2 years.
No, just not even
So-
one yet.
so it's
It
new.
is new. It's still pretty new.
And they actually, Shannon has one of the first wines that they made themselves, and it's our first 2011 wine that we've tried this evening. It's a 2011 dry Riesling, and Shannon and her husband Paul are, again, young people who are going to do great things. You're going to hear a lot of things in the coming years from Silver Thread Vineyard. So, Shannon, you want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about that wine?
Sure. So I think it is noticeable that there's been a shift from the 2010 vintage wines to the 11. So you're tasting a little bit of a difference in vintage, but also just some freshness. So there's no question that Riesling, as we were just talking about, it ages really well, but it's it's also great to drink young. And I think all the newly bottled Rieslings have a lot of really fresh estery aromas that tend to fade, and the wines become a little bit more elegant over time. But this is a nice representation of how they are when they're young. And as well, I guess my husband Paul's the winemaker, but I help a lot too. So as winemakers, we believe that the best wines, even single varietal wines like Riesling, come about through blending. So blending different blocks, different tanks. So this wine is actually a blend of the 3 different vineyards that we're working with right now. One is our own estate vineyard, but then we also have grapes from a vineyard owned by the Doyle family that's literally a stone's throw from our vineyard. We can see the grapes. And we also have a small vineyard we work with on Cayuga Lake that's right next door to Hosmer and Aaron's vineyard. So there's a little bit of Seneca and Cayuga in this wine, and each of the blocks of grapes were fermented separately using different yeasts, and then we experimented with different blends at the end before bottling. And it's interesting to note too that Silver Thread was always known before we owned it as the organic winery in the Finger Lakes, and the previous owner, Richard Fiegel, did manage the vineyard last year, so the portion of the grapes that are Silver Thread were organically grown. And so, as I said, what we were looking for was to have different layers in the wine. So layers of different types of fruit, different mineral and stony characteristics. And I think the biggest thing for me with Riesling is I want it to be really aromatic, just leaping out of the glass with lots of different complex aromas. The acidity should be mouth-watering, and I think that comes through here. And then also we want the wine to have length. So 30, 60, even more, 90 seconds after you swallow the wine, you should still be getting some impressions from it, getting some aromas coming through. So we're really excited about our first effort here, and hopefully everyone out there is trying it.
There was a question for you, Shannon. Why are there only 7 acres of Riesling at Silver Thread?
Oh, Silver Thread only has 7 acres of grapes altogether. So that's the total for our vineyard. So I think Riesling is probably about 3 of those acres. It's just a really small boutique winery. So if we expand the vineyard, which we can because we have more land, we definitely will be planting some more Riesling.
Great. We're looking for some more questions and feedback for Shannon on that wine. And while we're waiting to hear some more about that, I want to throw out to the panel, we had a marketing question about QR codes and whether they'll provide more accessibility to a whole new demographic. And I'm going to throw that one out to you, Calvi.
Yep, and I'm sitting here with my iPod, so that's even more appropriate. Some QR codes are the kind of funky looking codes on the back labels of some bottles that people can scan with their smartphone or device of that sort, and it takes them directly to a website with more information about whatever they've just scanned. So Red Newt's been doing this for a couple years with our wines. It's really helpful, especially as we're starting to expand more into Eastern Seaboard markets, larger markets, perhaps more savvy markets in terms of just people having access to those sorts of technologies, younger demographic. The younger demographic in particular has been getting more excited about Riesling the last few years. It's become kind of a really cool and interesting wine for them. So the more information that we can provide to them as they're in the store, and then also just kind of tying in with the way they use technology, the better it is for us.
Great. Any other, I kind of should have asked our panelists this evening, you guys are welcome. I know winemakers like to attack each other's wine, so feel free. No, seriously, if you guys have any feedback for each other, you're welcome to put it out there also. And well, we'll just give it another minute and see if we have any other questions for you guys. And
yeah, I think all these wines are very well made, and they represent a style which I think is going to become more popular. It certainly has been popular in Europe for years. I think a lot of people are confused about Riesling. They expect it to be sweet, and we really want to provide a wine to go with a meal and a bottle on the table of every restaurant. And I think any of these would be wonderful.
And I'll piggyback on that. This dry Riesling is the product that we've made the most of. out of all the different wines that we're making, and we've already found really good success with it in restaurants. So I think when you tell people that this is a signature style for the Finger Lakes, it's something we're known for. It's not what you might think of, but it's what we've gotten the most critical acclaim for, and we intend you to have it with dinner. It really changes how they view this one.
All right, I'm going to take one more question. This question's from Len Thompson from the New York Cork Report. Could someone talk about closures? Len's always bummed to see so many non-natural corks in these wines. Hurts the ability to age long term. So here we are saying that Finger Lakes Rieslings can age, and then folks are popping the bottle, and in some of these wines seeing not natural closures. So does anyone want to address that question?
At Silver Thread, we're exclusively using diam corks, which are demonstrated to age very, very well over time. So, and I think there's a lot of wineries switching to that closure, and others like it.
I think what he
we
might be
intend our
referring
wines to
to
age.
might be like
Plastic.
non-cork products.
Yeah, I would never use them in our wines. So.
We used them for about 5 years, and we're having terrible issues. 3 years down the road, or even 2 years down the road, wine oxidizing, and it's wine that should never have gone bad, that had plenty of life in it. And we have shifted to exclusively diam now in all of our vintage wines. I think this one actually has a natural cork in it. But yeah, I learned the hard way with wines not being able to age with synthetics.
Very good. How about, did you want to add something, Sarah?
Yeah, well, I use a synthetic cork, or have been until the company went bankrupt. So I no longer use them. They tend to last a little bit longer than most of the plastic products, but we're switching to a diam style, which I hope will be as good, actually. But
I think for
I certainly don't trust natural cork.
I think there's been a lot of improvement in them, and if you're encouraging people to hold on to those wines, we have to kind of look at putting something in there that they can keep it for 10 years.
Yeah.
And I want to, on behalf of the Wine Alliance, thank this panel for coming tonight. We're going to do a swap here and bring in our second panel. And thank you guys very much. Another 4 wines, and we're going to go right into them here. Our first wine in the second flight is from Cuca Springs Vineyards. We have with us this evening their winemaker, August Dimel. August is a recent Cornell graduate and fairly new to the Finger Lakes, but he is working at a great vineyard. Cuca Springs has made some great wines, and I'm sure they're excited to have August with them. And August, could you take us through a little bit of information about that 2011 Riesling you brought with you this evening?
Sure, yeah, this is very recent bottle. We bottled it actually just before I got there. The 2011 Riesling is a blend of a variety of Rieslings we had. We sourced Riesling from 3 different places, and like Shannon was talking about on the last panel, we really believe in blending Riesling. Not necessarily with other varieties, but with other Rieslings. We think that the whole is really more than the parts, and that by blending from different vineyard blocks, we can really get the product that we're looking for. And what we're looking for, what our house style is something more fruit-driven. This year I think we got some nice stone fruit aromas, some good citrus aromas, and that's sort of what we're driving with.
Great. Again, here we are. We kind of that first flight we had some 2010s and 111. We've got a couple more 2011s. Probably through you were in the area then, August. It was definitely a challenging year, the 2011 vintage.
Yeah, 2011 was a challenging year. I think that it was a very challenging year, both in the vineyard and in the cellar. But I think that as we start to look at the wines that actually came out in 2011, they probably are better than we expected. We're actually blending, doing some blending trials with reds right now, and I'm pleasantly surprised that the reds really achieved a nice level of ripeness. I think this Riesling right here is typical of the 2011s. I think they're probably a little crisper, a little cleaner. I think that there's probably a bit more acidity than the 2010s that we're tasting tonight. I think some of the 2010s are a bit of a riper style, but I think that the 2011s are actually a really nice contrast. I think it's nice that we have both in the flights tonight, because I think that they really they get to that difference in vintage, which is one of the things that I think is so exciting about Riesling, that you can have wines from the same block in 2 different years, and while there's a family resemblance, there's still a difference between the years. So I think that that's one of the exciting things about Riesling.
Probably a good time to ask the panel if anybody would like to say, based on what August was saying, one of the questions our media members had was, what was the difference between the 2010 and 11 vintages, the growing seasons?
I'll be happy to field that. Yeah, 2010 was really a warmer year, a drier year. 2011 had sort of a warm peak in the summer, but as harvest came around, there was more rain, a little cooler. I don't know if you guys have anything sort of to add to that characterization.
2010 was one of the first years since I've been making wine that we could pick everything we wanted to. Now, when we had to, it was a real striking year that way. 2011 was really a tale of 2 seasons. It started off very similar to 2010. Matter of fact, I think a lot of the reasons 2011 has been as good as it was is that June, July, and early part of August were exceptional, and then the rains came. But I think so much with growing grapes happens in those first 2.5 months. We came into a challenging vintage with grapes in good condition, and I think that's really what made the difference in 2011, because it wasn't rainy throughout. In fact, we were worried about the drought in May and June of 2011, which everyone forgot about, and August is the key.
Very good, guys. I think that was a good explanation. We're going to move into our second flight. Thank you, August. Our second wine in Flight 2 is from Lamoureux Landing Wine Cellars. Beautiful architectural building, the winery, and a great well-known winery in the region. We have Dennis DeClos from Lamoureux this evening, and he has their 2010 Red Oak Riesling. Dennis, that is a single vineyard Riesling, right?
It is. We have technically we have 4 single vineyard Rieslings at the winery, between our Black Diamond, our Red Oak, our Round Rock, and our Yellow Dog vineyard Rieslings. All have their own intricate characteristics, much like August was saying, with growing practices and blending purposes. We do have a couple of Rieslings that we blend between our block vineyards as well, but we decided to bring in the terroir feel with the single vineyards as well and really showcase them. And Red Oak has been extremely consistent for us from year to year, as well as the Round Rock and the Yellow Dog, actually. And it's really fun to just play with the different intricacies between those vineyard designations.
Great.
As for this Red Oak that you are tasting at the moment, of course, it's aptly named for the giant red oak tree that's actually planted in the vineyard. The vineyard is located a couple miles south of us at the winery, down on County Road 137, which, if you've ever been to the area, there's tons of these county roads. And it's actually right across the street from another one of our single vineyards, the Round Rock. And it's amazing just being across the street, the different soil compositions that we have, playing huge parts in intricacies between the 2 wines.
I know for some folks are probably interested. I know the owner, Mark Wagner, is involved, but who's the actual winemaker at the Lamoureux?
At this point, Colin Grant, who has actually been there for a few years as the assistant winemaker, is now our head winemaker. He's been doing an exceptional job at keeping levels of consistent quality within the cellars.
Very good. All right, I'm going to field another question from some of the questions that our media gave us. And I'll just throw this one out to the panel. Do you see an increased consumer interest in sustainability? And would anyone like to talk about sustainable practices, challenges, and rewards in our area? Anybody want to handle that one?
I think it's interesting that viticulture is the ultimate sustainable crop. It's a perennial crop. When I first got into business 30 years ago, everybody tilled their vineyards. That's now the exception. It's unusual to see that. So from a soil erosion standpoint, there's a huge difference. I know a number of wineries as well have drastically reduced the amount of herbicides that we use. It's rare for most of our different vineyards to ever see inorganic fertilizers. That's also very unusual from our standpoint. Our biggest battle is diseases, not insects. Insecticides are relatively rare use. So I think we've been sustainable for a long time. I think it's a term now. I think taking the traditional viticulture and Finger Lakes is something we've been doing for a long, long time. Consumers are interested. I don't think it's the first thing we think about. I think wine quality is always the first thing we think about. But it's certainly a peripheral question that gets answered.
And I think the Finger Lakes really have a lot of advantages in terms of sustainability. If you look at some other wine regions in the United States, they tend to be in some very, very dry places, and water has become a central concern to many wine regions and has really called into question the long-term viability of those regions. And I think one of the fantastic things about the Finger Lakes is that we have a lot of water. We have a lot. I mean, we're surrounded by it, and when the Finger Lakes is out of water, we probably have much bigger problems. I think that the Finger Lakes have a lot of natural advantages that, as going forward in the next 20, 30 years, I think we're going to see that play out. And so, in terms of a sustainable place to build a wine region, I think that there's few places that in the United States that have quite the same natural advantages that we do.
Thank you. Well, I think we'll go ahead and move on to our third wine of the second flight. We have from Thirsty Owl Wine Company. We have John Cup, kind of owner, jack of all trades. He could be anywhere at the winery. Thirsty Owl, if you're not familiar, another Cayuga Lake winery with, I think, one of the best views in the Finger Lakes, and make some great wines there. And they've had some great Rieslings over the years, including the Governor's Cup winner. And John, you want to tell us a little bit about the 2010 Riesling?
Surely I can. As we already discussed, the 2010 growing season was a pretty easy one. Usually I think of a lot of vintages in the Finger Lakes as either a red year or a white year. I think of 10 as a red and a white year. It's good for both varieties, or both types of grapes. A lot of early heat, moderate rainfall throughout. It never got really dry, never really got very wet. Harvest came pretty much at will when you wanted to pick the grapes. You could pick your numbers the way you want, so there weren't a lot of adjustments once it got to the tank. The Riesling that we poured today is a blend of two different vineyards, both estate grown. One vineyard's pretty old, and that's primarily the vineyard that's involved in this Riesling. 80% of the juice comes from that particular vineyard. It was planted in the 1980s by Bob and Mary Plain. It is an unknown clone. We tried to figure it out over time, but we still haven't been able to ascertain that. Back in the day, you asked, what did you plant back then? We said Riesling. A lot different than it is today. When we attained the vineyard back in 2001, it was on a 3-wire system, so we've done a lot of work to put it back to VSB trellising, do an intense canopy management to help the fruit flavors come along. Our second vineyard was planted in 2006 and quite a bit different than the other vineyard. That's 20% of what this wine is. That's mostly clone 09 and clone 239. They're only about 300 yards apart. It tastes quite different, at least to us. That first vineyard, a lot of grapefruit and pineapple flavors to it. The other vineyard, a little bit more minerality, a little bit more peach flavors that it throws. As far as harvest notes, this particular one, we started harvest around October 7th. We finished on October 9th, so it came pretty quick between the two vineyards. The average sugars were 22.2 if you average all the tanks together. All the fermentation started in October 9th. We fermented about 60 degrees. We used 3 different yeasts, Epernay 2, W15, and one other yeast that we use in a small tank. After all the tanks are pretty much done with fermentation around Halloween time through about November 10th. After the tanks were all through fermentation, we blend to taste. We'll go through the tanks and taste different yeasts and blend them together to see what comes out best by vineyard and by what the yeast was. We were done with our bench trials on December 3rd, so we blended them to taste as well. Cold stabilization began on December 29th. Started bottling on June 7th and finished on June 9th. So that's the history of that particular wine. It's done pretty well as far as the works too. So
Very good. Now that old wine is one of a couple of best of.
It's one
Rieslings,
best
right?
of class, 2 double goals, and 6 gold medals in it. So.
That's awesome. Quickly wanted to just, John, what is the retail price of that one?
That's $14.95.
And could I go backwards for 1 second? Dennis, the red oak, what's the retail price of that?
Retail at the winery is $19.98.
And August, the Riesling from Cuba Springs?
$13.95.
Okay. And I'll go ahead for a second, Derek. What's the price on
Same price, around 14.
Okay. And I wanted to, before we move on, we'll see if we have any questions for John. I wanted to throw out, we had someone ask about this IRF scale on the label and whether or not you guys feel it's important to assist the consumer with their buying decisions. Anybody want to take that one?
Well, I'm looking at the bottles right now, and it seems like we're the only ones at the moment using it on our bottles, and we are using it on every single Riesling that we have at the moment. Being out with the wholesalers themselves and really seeing the market out there, it does help put a little bit of a marketing point on it, but as far as the Finger Lakes go, keeping a consistent product is really going to be the best sales point that we even have. And it seems like everybody around here is doing that, keeping up a really consistent, good quality wine. Does it help? Yes, it does. Is it going to hurt not to have it? I don't think it's really going to hurt, but it does help.
Yeah, I see off-premise accounts asking for it more and more every time they're going to see them. Customers come in, they don't really know what they're getting. They're a little confused on what they get, so they go with a regular versus trying something new that they think they might like. So.
Seems like it could have some merit. Also, Thirsty Owl, John, you have Sean Kime working with you in one area also. I figured you'd probably want to throw him in there. He's one of the hardest working guys I know in there. I don't know what John does to the guy, but he's got him out in the vineyard, in the cellar.
We're lucky to have Sean, so Sean is Thirsty Owl, so we're very happy to have
cool.
Sean, so yes.
I think we don't have any more questions for John. Then we're going to slide over to Derek Wilbur. Derek has the Penguin Bay Winery 2011 Riesling. Derek is probably, I'm trying to think, we had Sarah in here too. Derek is definitely one of the most experienced winemakers in the Finger Lakes. He has a great reputation. He made wine at, moved around a little bit in the early years, was at Swedish Hill for a long time, then White Springs, and then now back at Swedish Hill and Penguin Bay and Goosewatch Wineries. And definitely someone, as when I first got in the wine business, I looked up to. Derek has done a great job in the region. He has his 2011 Riesling. And Derek, you want to talk a little bit about how that wine is made?
Thanks, Joe. Everyone talks about how long I've been in the business. I always remind my friend that says the difference between having 26 years experience and 1 year's experience 26 times. And I'd like to think I've been, I've given as much as I've gotten. Maybe I hope that I've learned a lot from everybody else in the industry as well. The Penguin Bay Riesling is one of actually 5 Rieslings that we make along with our sister wineries. One of the great benefits of working at a place that makes that number of Rieslings is, just as everybody else has talked about here before, diversity in terms of complexity in Riesling, not only is clonal, not only is location, but also what you do once you begin the winery. This particular wine is actually from 3 different vineyards, 3 different yeast strains, and then the other thing that we have, the part that winemakers get involved in, is we also do different things once it comes into winery. Different fermentation temperatures, we stop wines at different residual sugars, all these things add complexity. And like everybody else has talked to here, excuse me, the great fun of being a winemaker is then you sit down with these wines at various stages throughout the process, and you make decisions in terms of what you're going to do with them. And that's one of the great things. We've all talked about blending. I think it makes a tremendous difference with any variety, but particularly with Riesling. This is actually the sweetest wine that we make among our group. It's 33 grams per liter, 3.3%. And making a sweet Riesling, the real key here is finish. I mean, this has relatively low acidity at 7.5 grams, but the key with me, with Rieslings anyway, is mouthfeel. And I think we work not only to get the finish right with acid and sugar, but also we work very, very hard if we have to refine appropriately to make sure that the finish is long, and you build the body with these wines not only with alcohol, but also with sugar. This is probably the most fruit forward of our wines we made in 2011. A little bit of peach, a little bit of apple in there. It's really designed as an aperitif wine as opposed to a table wine. I think the flight of wines we've had here, both the first one and the second one, shows again the breadth of Rieslings you have. They can all finish with different levels of sweetness, but all these wines we've tasted tonight have had great mouthfeel. I think the concern often people have with Rieslings is they don't have weight in the mouth. I think we've been very fortunate to try all these wines today. It's a great finish, great weight in the mouth, which I think is really, really important from the standpoint of Rieslings. So, again, this is young. It's going to age out a little bit, but right now it's very, very fruitful from that standpoint.
One of the questions we had just had from a blogger was if there was any non-Riesling blended into the wine.
Mm-hmm. This does have a little bit of two wines, actually. It's got a little bit of Belgian Muscat, which is a variety that actually developed at the Geneva Experiment Station here in New York that adds a little bit of peach to it, and a small amount of Cayenne White as well, which is another variety that we use on occasion with Riesling. We're not ones that believe exclusively in making 100% wine. As a matter of fact, very few of our varietals across the board are 100% varietal. And that's, again, something that the winemakers themselves have a hand in. Some years we do, some years we don't. That's why I'm not one that believes it has to be 100%.
Very good. Before I get any other questions for Derek, I think it's a fairly important question the media had. What are the harvest projections for this season? Always tough at this time of the year to answer that question. But if anybody wants to take a stab at it.
Well, this projection is cold. It's been, we had a little bit of a rough season early on, had some frost damage in some vineyards early in the season. It's been actually very similar to last year at this stage of the game as well, where we're a bit ahead on heat units, a little bit dry at the moment. Things look good right now. We've laid the foundation to a good vintage. We'll have to see what August and September and October do. But there's optimism at this point, I think.
I think definitely. Very good. We'll wait for a second and see if we can get any other questions. I think we've answered most of the media questions for this evening. Distribution of your wines. I'm going to kind of just shoot back through the whole bunch. You can tell me where you're distributed so folks can find out where and how they can get the wines. Derek, why don't you go first?
East Coast, New York, Massachusetts, contiguous states to New York, predominantly, also a little bit in Virginia and Maryland.
And then mail order to other states. John, how about you guys?
Buffalo to New York City, pretty much right now.
Okay, and then some shipping out of state?
Shipping out of state, quite a few states. We're going into Colorado, getting a distributor here shortly as well. So.
Okay. How about you, Dennis, for Lamero?
Much like John, we're from Buffalo down to New York City at this point, up the Plattsburgh area, down all throughout the state, basically. And again, shipping through the winery itself to most of the country.
And August, how about Cuba Springs?
Very similar. We distribute in New York State, mostly Rochester and Buffalo, in addition to our local accounts here and Northern Flagship, wherever you want us to distribute. We also have a wine club.
Kind of like a recurring theme, I think, for Finger Lakes wineries. A lot of them are still mostly in New York State, and then shipping directly out. There are a couple, Swedish Hill, Wagner's. There are a few that are doing some stuff on the East Coast, but their distribution is still fairly small, and a lot of that has to do with the production levels too.
In New York, it's like their wines.
They're buying it. All right, let me just check and see if we have any other questions for you guys, and I think we're going to wrap things up. I want to take a minute and thank the four of you guys for coming tonight, and thank our bloggers and writers for tasting the wines and giving us a little feedback, and we'll look forward to hearing how you enjoyed the wines this evening. And thank you very much from the Finger Lakes Wine Alliance. Thank you. Wait, don't go anywhere. Hot off the press, there's one more question. One of our bloggers was visiting Lamero, and they said they couldn't ship to Texas at that time. Has that changed?
I don't believe that's changed at this point. Within the
And,
last year, I don't believe any of our shipping issues have changed. There are a few states that we do not ship to for various reasons, depending on if it's state-run liquor stores or if we have dry counties in the state and we're trying to stay away from making the mistake of sending a product to a dry county. So at this point, I don't believe that has changed.
And I would probably say her best bet would be just to contact the winery directly.
Yep, you can always contact us at lamarowine.com. Our phone number is there as well.
Sounds good. Thank you. We're going to cut things off there, and thanks again.